So, in the current event, we were allowed to use Chevreuse, even though she isn't released yet. And this let us view all of her talents and constellations. And my god, she looks pretty darn impressive. If we look at her A1, she has somewhat of a Nilu-esque thing going on, where she wants you to run a party of all Pyro and Electro units. If you do, then anytime any party member triggers Overload, the Pyro and Electro resistance of every enemy hit by the Overload will be decreased by 40% for 6 seconds. This may not sound like it at first glance, but this is kinda better than VV Shred, because it will shred both elements every time, without needing to do any jank rotation setups, and also as long as you're consistently triggering Overload, the resistance shred will be constantly applied, giving you full uptime on it. Whereas with VV, you can't refresh it from our field. Now, if we also look at her skill, it deals AoE pyro damage, and anytime any party member triggers Overload, Chevreuse will gain what is called an overcharged ball, and if you use her skill with this ball, then the skill will deal greater damage with a bigger AoE. On top of that, after using her skill, Chevreuse will gain an effect that causes her to heal the active character over time, and this makes her the only pyro healer in the game not named Bennett. So on top of all the buffing she provides, she may also be able to cover your team's healer slot. If we look at the scalings of Chevreuse's skill, it actually looks pretty high. In the event, we get her at talent level 11, and it can't be changed, so I don't know what the scalings at talent level 13 are. But the scalings on her overcharged ball look pretty good. 536.6% attack scaling. Her healing scales with her HP though. The healing doesn't look particularly high, so chances are she won't be able to build for damage and still have sufficient healing. And one more thing with her skill, it seems to make about 4 pyro particles, so that should be really good for funneling. For example, in scenarios where you're playing on the same team as Zhongling, funneling 4 particles directly to Zhongling would be pretty nice. Now, Chevreuse's burst isn't anything too special. It deals AoE damage on cast and creates, I think, 8 bombs, which will explode like a second later, dealing more AoE pyro damage. The talent level is only 8 in the event, so the scaling here is a lot lower than it would be at talent 13. But even at talent 8, assuming there are 8 bombs, this is like 1217 attack scaling on a 60 cost burst. Chevreuse's A4 also looks like a pretty important part of her kit. Basically, after she uses her skill with an overcharged ball, she will buff attack percent for every Pyro and Electro party member by up to 40% based on her max HP. Since it is based on her max HP, it probably won't be too big of a buff if you build her for damage, but even then I think she'll probably have enough HP for the buff to be like 20% attack. That's a team-wide buff, so that's pretty large, especially when you consider that it lasts an entire 30 seconds. And if you do build her for HP, then you should be getting the full 40% while also making her heal a lot more. So I think she's going to have 2 build paths, either going for attack damage crit for sub DPS, or focusing entirely on HP for healing and buffing. Also, one more thing with this passive is, unlike her A1, this one doesn't actually require a full Pyro and Electro team. Well, let's take a look at the effects of our constellations. For C1, if your party is fully Pyro and Electro, then when an active character triggers Overload, they will gain 6 energy. This has a 10-second cooldown. So this gives Chevreuse some pretty nice battery capabilities, although it might not be quite as good as it sounds, as it may be hard to get the character that you actually want getting the energy refund to be the one triggering this constellation in time. But we'll see how that plays out. Her C2 gives her even more scaling on her skill, dealing 2 instances of 120% attack scaling pyro damage when you use her hold skill, although this does have a 10-second cooldown. Now her C4 is really interesting. After you use her burst, C4 will make it so that her whole skill can be used twice without going on cooldown. So if I am understanding this correct, you'll be able to, after using her burst, you'll be able to do hold E 3 times in a row. Assuming that's correct, with the T8 and T11 talent scalings, and her C2, this would be a bit over 3000% total scaling. I don't know the talent 13 scalings, but I'm assuming this would be closer to like 3500% scaling at talent 13. To put into perspective how good that is, that's slightly higher than Zhongling's entire burst scalings over its full 14-second duration. And with Chevreuse, this damage would be all front-loaded. However, it is 3 hold skills, so it may take too much field time for a lot of teams to fit them all in. I haven't done any frame counts, but guesstimating based on what I've seen in the test run, both her burst and hold skill seem to only take about 1 second of field time each, so this should be somewhere around 4 seconds total of field time if you do all 3. I can see that being worth it in some teams and scenarios for front-loaded AoE damage. And even if you don't do all 3 and do like, say, 2 instead, the scaling is still pretty good, plus she should be getting all of her own buffs. And lastly, her C6 gives her even more buffing. Basically, after 12 seconds of her healing, she will do a team-wide heal. Additionally, anytime a party member is healed by Chevreuse, they will gain 20% pyro and electro damage bonus, which stacks up to 3 times for 60%. That's a lot of damage bonus. And since the buff lasts for 8 seconds, while the healing duration lasts for 12 seconds and should refresh after each skill cast, you should basically have full uptime on this buff. On top of that, this damage bonus applies to any character that gets healed by Chevreuse, so you can get it on the entire team as long as they get healed by Chevreuse while you are rotating through the team. Now, don't think that you're going to be having a full 60% damage bonus on the entire team all the time. This is a ramping buff, so you will likely have like 1 to 2 stacks on average on your off-field characters, and likely like around, say, 2 on average on your main DPS. But even then, that's 40% damage bonus to the main DPS and 20 to 40% to the rest of the team. If we combine this with everything else in our kit, Chevreuse is offering 20 to 40% team-wide damage bonus with full uptime, 40% resistance shred to both elements with full uptime, and roughly 20 to 40% team-wide attack buff with full uptime. So that's basically C6 Farazan levels of buffing, and Chevreuse does it while healing and having potentially great sub-DPS damage. However, all of this does come with one big caveat, which is that you do lose the resistance shred if your party isn't fully pyro and electro, and the resistance shred is a huge part of our buffing. Currently, there do not exist any optimal teams that only have pyro and electro units on them, but I think Chevreuse can make this a new type of team archetype that could potentially perform very well compared to other team options. I have not done any team calcs as I am waiting for it to actually be released and know her proper scalings at Talent 13 first, but I will give some examples of teams I'm imagining being really good with Chevreuse. Firstly, Raiden. I can see Raiden working very well with Chevreuse, using a team like Raiden, Chevreuse, Bennett, Sarah, or Raiden, Chevreuse, Sarah, Zhongling. The first is just Hyper Raiden but with Chevreuse instead of Kazuha. You would lose the grouping, and this team doesn't have any off-field pyro application, so you wouldn't be able to refresh the resistance shred, but I can still see this being a very competent team option for Raiden. The second team, using Zhongling and not Bennett, I actually like the idea of this better in theory. With Zhongling here, you would lose Bennett's massive buffing, but Chevreuse and Sarah are still buffing plenty, and having full uptime on the resistance shred, plus also having Zhongling's personal damage, I think would more than make up for not having Bennett. This team would also have no circle impact restrictions, which would be a very nice practical benefit, especially when you have overloads happening. And then one more idea I have would just be Raiden, Chevreuse, Bennett, Xiangling, so triple pyro. You would lose Sarah's buffing, however you would get Bennett's buffing on everybody, and you would still have Xiangling for off-field pyro to refresh the resistance shred. I think this would be the best of both worlds and potentially be Raiden's new best team for using her as an on-field DPS. Also, one more really nice thing about these teams is, like Raiden National, Raiden is the only 5-star unit on the team, so these could be really good for low-cost speedrunning if that's something you're into. Another character I can see benefiting a lot from Chevreuse is Yoimiya. That's very fitting since Chevreuse is going to be on the Raiden plus Yoimiya banner. Yoimiya does lose out on Vaporize if you use Chevreuse, but I think it will be worth it. Yoimiya only vaporizes her in 1, in 3, and in 5, so it's not like Hu Tao where almost all of her damage gets vaped. I think Chevreuse buffing is high enough to be worth more or equivalent to vape. The team I am imagining is Yoimiya, Chevreuse, Bennett, Fischl. Yoimiya is an excellent Fischl driver, so she will help Fischl get a ton of C6 and A4 procs, and both Fischl and Yoimiya will be hyper buffed by Chevreuse and Bennett. Yoimiya and Fischl are very single target, but if you build Chevreuse as a sub DPS, I can see her front-loaded AoE damage being able to somewhat mitigate Yoimiya's AoE issues. One other thing I really like about this team compared to Vaporize is you'll be able to dodge on Yoimiya without losing nearly as much damage as you do on Vaporize, since Vaporize is heavily reliant on vaporizing specific hits, but this team is not, so it should make shieldless Yoi way less punishing to play. One issue that may occur is Overload knocking enemies away, and potentially causing Yoimiya to miss them, but I think lightweight enemies like that would die too fast for that to really be much of an issue. As long as this isn't a huge deal, I can see this being a really good team for Yoimiya, and very likely her new best team. You could also play the same team with another pyro DPS like Yanfei or Klee. I can definitely see this being Yanfei's best team, but Klee's forward vaporized teams with Farina are really strong. I don't see this being stronger, although I could see it being pretty darn close. And another team I see being really good with Chevreuse is a quick swap team with Yai Miko. So something like Yai, Chevreuse, Bennett, Fischl. You don't need to spend prolonged time on field on anyone in this team, so Chevreuse should be able to fit in all 3 of her skill casts. And with Chevreuse's C1, Fischl, and Electro Resonance, Yai should be able to burst every rotation without needing too much energy recharge. So between Yai's burst and Chevreuse's 3 skill casts, this team should have a ton of front-loaded AoE damage. You also don't even need off-field pyro, since you can just swap to Bennett and use his skill as needed to refresh the resistance shred. And lastly, one final character I can see Chevreuse being good with is Cyno. Now, I do not mean to use Cyno in a pure pyro and electro team. I don't think that's going to be good. Instead, what I mean is using her as the healer on an aggravate Cyno team. So Cyno, Nahida, Fischl, Chevreuse. You won't get the resistance shred, but you will still get the 40% attack buff and the damage bonus from Chevreuse C6, while she covers your team's healer slot. I don't think this is by any means going to make Aggravate Cyno comparable to Quick Bloom, but I can definitely see it being an upgrade to Aggravate. If you are interested in Cyno with the full Pyro Electro party though, I think the best bet would be Cyno, Chevreuse, Xiangling, Fischl. Again, I don't see this being very good, but I would be very glad to be proven wrong here. But those are all the team ideas I have for Chevreuse at the moment. Her kit looks extremely promising, and I think she's going to be a very good character. I am very excited to fully theory craft her once she's out. But if you liked today's video, please be sure to give it a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And let me know your comments down below. Thanks. Bye.